Chapter 4. Max. The balls of that man, Jonas. He invites me to a party to make me jealous. He's married to my wife, for fuck's sake, and now he wants to parade Alex around for everyone to prove to me what a large cock he has. He doesn't have the balls or the cock to hold a woman like Alex. I paced over to the wall near the chimney, stared for a second, and hit it. I wanted to hit my head against it for being such a dick. No man in his right mind throws away a woman like Alex and I did. My children has no mother, and all I can do is watch another man claim what I'd prized the most in my life. She'd always been true to me and tried to give me my desires at her own peril, and she took on my responsibilities concerning Jonas. What are you talking about? Alex is no longer your wife, Jonas barked, reminding me of how cruel I'd been to Alex and him by accusing them of something they would never do. I didn't want to hear any of that, especially from Jonas, and because of my own denial that I had been wrong. So wrong where it had cost me everything. Alex will always be my wife. Don't you know that? I said, panting and rubbing my knuckles. Doesn't she know it? I'm not finished with Alex, and I never will be. No one will enjoy her as long as I have breath in my body, I admitted out loud. Do you hear yourself, Max? If you hadn't jumped to conclusions about us and gotten crazy jealous, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would be in bed with Alex, and I would be somewhere. Fucking up someone's life, I said to Jonas. I didn't mean it the way it sounded, but I couldn't take this lonely feeling, this empty numbing sensation any longer. I've had to clean up too much mess created by Jonas, and I reacted as I usually do, when my emotions are deeply invested. I admitted it was me who had fucked up my life and Alex's, but never something the likes of this. You know, Max, you say some pretty shitty stuff and you act as if I haven't done anything to help you in your business and your life, but I took a lot of pressure off you and brought on plenty on myself. Jonas had been partly right, but not completely. Can't we talk about something else? I'm sorry, Jonas, I'll try to watch my words next time. I strode over to where Jonas sat facing the fireplace, and tapped him on the shoulder. Help me. He glanced up at me. It was out of my element to ask for the kind of help I needed from Jonas. Jonas raised an eyebrow in anticipation. Help me plan how to get my Alex back with me, and our children. There was a long pause and silence in the room, and nothing coming in the way of Jonas helping me out, therefore I decided to change the subject. That fucking yacht is larger than anything I owned. Christian bought my yacht for pennies, sold it, and now he's king of the sea. I paced around until I ended up in front of Jonas once more. Jonas placed the book he'd been reading on the table next to him. He knew once I got to railing about Alex and Christian, he wouldn't be able to concentrate. You know, I had been trying to get Alex to sail with me, and she refused. Now he's dangling two things that I love in front of me. I don't understand, Max. You said you didn't want Alex anymore if that man had put his hands on her, and she would allow him. Now you're talking about a vessel he purchased from you and sold it, and bought the one you had your eyes on. If I remembered correctly, Alex refused to sail with you because she gets seasick easily, and she doesn't like water. Precisely, I said to Jonas. So what the fuck is she doing on that floating battleship? I groaned as Jonas watched while I selected something from my wardrobe delivered to me for tonight. That Christian character said the party would be informal and fuck him, I'm wearing my tux. He's the worst kind of person, and Alex and you didn't know what you were getting into when you set up this little revenge plot. What did I do to you, Jonas, where you would betray me, and Alex would take up with someone like him? I can understand Alex being pissed. Plopping next to Jonas, I turned to him, not expecting him to say, You cut me off of money I was entitled to, and no, I didn't fuck up my inheritance. I worked for you, did dirty jobs for you, took care of your children. And almost got my children's mother killed or worst, and now the worst has come to bite me and you in the ass. Christian is worse than Robert or those slimy criminals you enjoyed hanging around. Those are people you introduced me to, remember? Or have you forgotten? Men with money and no morals will do anything. Those are the men you've familiarized yourself with and introduced Alex to. You're partially to blame if blame is being handed out. And I see it is, Jonas barked back at me. I glared at Jonas and sat back in my chair. He'd been right all along. Before, I'd arranged for him to impersonate me at my meetings. It went so well, I depended on him to continue with the charade when I didn't want to fly out of town or to Europe. The only unscrupulous things he'd done before I got him involved with these weird friends of mine were to marry an underage girl who had forged her birth certificate, cost him money. It had been me who insisted he open BDSM clubs to keep him out of trouble, and to service me when I was a bachelor, and not married to Alex. Jonas was trying to help me and Alex was trying to help Jonas. I didn't realize until now what kind of damage I'd done to the both of them. You're right, Jonas. I've done a lot of things I'm guilty of. If you give me a chance, I'll make amends, and if Alex will take me back, I'll spend my life being her slave. Jonas turned to me after looking at the pictures of me and Alex, the children and him. He dropped the pictures on the table in front of us. What has Christian done that you would think he's capable of despicable things? Jonas questioned. I wondered if he just that stupid, or was he that naive? He has a reputation for supplying women to all kinds of men. Mostly young women. I'd heard that too, but why would he want Alex? She's hardly 16. Beautiful and almost 30, hardly young and innocent. You can't be serious. Maybe he loves to break women. You can't really break someone young, they have no sense of who they are yet, but a woman like Alex would pose a challenge and threat to his manhood. He would probably consider her a challenge, and trust me, she is a challenge. I should know, and that's why I've always wanted her and loved her. She was the only woman who could bring me to my knees literally and figuratively. I smiled at the thought, then turned to face Jonas. I smiled when I thought of the times I'd fuck her after, and before she'd lashed my ass and put her high heels into my groin. She even made me wear a penis ring, and dared me to come. Rising from my chair and adamant about how I wanted to present myself in front of Alex, because that was all that mattered to me, I said to Jonas. The only reason I accepted Christian's invitation was to make sure Alex was safe. It will be up to her to decide if she wants to come home with me. I can't make her, and I hope she wants to, because if she stays one more week, she could end up like all his other wives. Why didn't I know about the wives, and how many did he have before her? Jonas asked. 5 or 6. What? And you knew about them and didn't say anything? Jonas said in an accusatory voice. When the fuck did I have the chance? You and Alex went off half-cocked, and didn't give me an inkling of what you were doing. I didn't have time to think things over before I learned that she'd married him. You know how I am when it comes to Alex. You should have given me heads up or time. I tried with the excuses, but the expression of disbelief on Jonas's face said that excuse wasn't good enough. Yes, I know, Max. Something always happens, and you complain about how someone dies when I'm around, but what about you? We're twin brothers, remember? I know your thoughts, your fears, and the darkness that lurks inside you is also present within me, Jonas admitted, waiting for my reaction. I'd never acknowledge my failings, and he knew I wouldn't, and in that way he did know my mind. Don't remind me, I huffed out a loud breath and turned to Jonas. I want you to take care of my children when I leave to meet Christian, and I have to take helicopter to get on board. I don't know how long I'll be gone. Before this thing with Christian is over, I will need you here with my children. Perhaps until I bring their mother home, which may take a week or more time than I've planned. Jonas had his eyes lowered and his head bowed, taking a sip of a drink he'd been nursing for a while. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Can I depend on you to do this for me? Jonas met my eyes. Wouldn't it be better if I were to go with you, or as you? Then Christian wouldn't know he's dealing with 2 different men. One of us could locate Alex and talk to her. I could hide out on the yacht. I know all kinds of places I can hide. Maybe I can convince her to leave him. I know you, Max, and you risk enraging her with questions about her sleeping with Christian. I thought about what Jonas had said and proposed, but I wasn't sure how that would work, and there was the notion I'd harbored about Jonas. Maybe in the biblical sense that whatever Jonas touched, it would sour or come to an unsatisfactory end, and I'd be up to my head in situations I hadn't planned for. Some of what Jonas had implied about my jealousy had been true, but I had learned my lessons and put my emotions and jealous behavior aside and focus on getting Alex to come home with me. Yet the idea of him impersonating me made a lot of sense. This wouldn't be the first time I'd used Jonas in that capacity, because I'd been a shrewd businessman, and Jonas proved to be my best asset in my companies. However, this was my family I was fighting for now, and I couldn't risk the least bit of stumble Jonas might make. I'd wanted to tell him yes, but I couldn't take the chance that he'd fuck this up, because after all it was my family that would suffer if I couldn't straighten this out. I'd created this mess, and only I could get out of it. No, Jonas. For once, do as I'd asked you. Take care of my children. When I know they're safe, then that's the only way I can do what I have to. And what is that, Max? Whatever is necessary. Jonas shook his head because he knew me, and he knew himself. He'd known the answer when he asked the question. Chapter 5. Jonas. Whatever was necessary. I furrowed my brow and narrowed my eyes at Max's statement. What the hell did that mean? Did Max mean he would sacrifice Alex if it came down to him winning? I'd seen Max behave like that and made a similar statement, and I shuddered to think what he'd been capable of. Was he the one who killed Robert? I didn't have any answers, and I didn't want to entertain that idea because I'd leave today and warn Alex. Was Max capable of doing away with both of them, if he thought his children would find out things he didn't want them to about their mother? And what did I know about Max's world as he chose to include me in this lurid secretive rich man's life? I've never had his resources because he kept them from me, even though I'd been entitled to my inheritance. When did I have the time to engage in such wanton behavior Christian and Max had reveled in? I had been in the service of my country, and when I returned home, Max had said I wasn't responsible enough to handle my fortune. I had been in his shadow since then, and he had been ordering me around even now when it was his fault that pushed Alex to desperation, and with her seeing no way out, she married that freak. Max had made this general assumption about me, that I knew what was going on with Christian. Did he think I would have let Alex get involved with Christian if he hadn't cut us off from everything, from money for me to take care of Alex? From Alex's children. That was it. He was afraid I could take care of her, I thought. With Max controlling the purse strings to my inheritance, I stayed under Max's control, and I decided to open up a bondage club primarily to help him. He'd been all fucked up before he met and married Alex, but running a place like that doesn't make me an expert on what's in some of these sick men's minds. Even Max had been far gone, until I'd suggested he get into bondage to calm him down where he could sleep at night. I'd say Alex and I had saved his life, and instead of him attacking me for introducing her to someone who could bring him to his senses, Max is blaming me once again for something he'd set into motion. I've seen enough men like my brother and Christian to last a lifetime, but that didn't make me an expert on what they were capable of doing. Max hadn't completely gone over like Christian, or though I thought, because Alex and their children had brought stability to his life. However, Christian was a different animal altogether. He was young without anyone to rein him in. An only child after losing his older sister, and now his parents were dead, leaving him with massive amounts of money and connections. Max and my story had been somewhat the same, but we had Alex to ground us. That was then. All I've ever wanted was someone like Alex, but all I've gotten were women who never wanted anything except my money. And the others, and there were a long line of them, I never had that sexual and mental connection with them that I craved. I kept clear of most men like Christian, especially after what had happened in my bondage club in New York. I had stayed clear of close relationship, of the kind of predators I knew Christian to be. The Blackstone men weren't predators. We may have been kinky in our sexual desires, but we would never hurt women. And I fear Christian is one that would, because he had too much money, too much time to care about anything but himself, and to satisfy his sexual deviancy, whatever that may be. I shuddered to think what Alex was going through. Maybe Max had a general idea when he discovered she'd married Christian, and that's why he's so concerned about her now. Max suspected he could have been like Christian if Alex hadn't come into his life, and that could be me with the money to corrupt and fuck up my life up more than it had been. I'd done that early, and I was well on my way if it hadn't been for Alex. She had been a constant in our lives, and I didn't know she'd marry Christian for his money. I should have known it wouldn't be this easy where he'd give her all the money she'd asked for without something in return. Because we both needed money, I overlooked a lot of things. If Max hadn't woke up and realized we never had a relationship with each other before, it was too late, but perhaps it's too late for any of us, but I don't want to tell this to Max. All this happened because Alex needed money to fight Max in court for her children. If he took the children and she couldn't see them again, she would die, and I knew it. Reaching for my phone, I knew what I had to do. I have to get to Alex and see what Christian had done to her. But I know her, she would fight him to the bitter end before she'd capitulate to any of his demands, or play his sick games unless she had no other choice. I feared she had been put in a position where choices were out of her hands. I feared she's being held captive aboard that yacht, or I would have heard from her by now if just to inquire about her children. Alex had fought Max because she loved him, and had his child at the time. She was young, 21, strong, and she did what she had to do to bring him down to his knees and for him to see that she wasn't like anyone else. Secretly, I think Max loved and detested her at the same time. He could not make her obey him, and he couldn't punish her because she was the dominatrix he needed in their sexual relationship. I didn't know how she would fare with Christian in that role. Max gave in to Alex because he loved her, but Christian loves only Christian. Alex is a valuable commodity he can afford to buy, and then discard if she doesn't suit his program. It's a game Alex doesn't know how to play, and she can't win a game against a man who doesn't care and isn't in love with her. That's where I came in. I stood in the galley of Christian's ship, preparing a plate for Alex. I'd gotten a job at the last minute as a steward on Christian's yacht, because of the parties he'd planned to host. I'd cut my hair into a buzz cut the way I'd worn it in the Marines, and I'd shaved my beard where not even my mother would recognize me if she were alive. She didn't when I came home from 3 tours in Afghanistan looking the exact way. It was a time when Max and I were close, and he'd admired my service, which he thought he could never do. He was probably right, and I could never juggle the companies he owned, and the time he had to spend away from a beautiful wife and doting children. When I entered the galley on my first day, and after training aboard the vessel, I was given the task of serving Christian and Alex. After bringing breakfast to their cabins, I'd made the assumption that they would be in bed together. Although I didn't want to see it, I was surprised and happy to learn they hadn't slept together or shared the same cabin since they were married. To quell any kind of gossip, Christian would say to the crew that he and Alex would have an extended honeymoon in Cancun, then fly to Lake Como in Italy where he had several homes. I didn't know if any of it was true, but I needed to stop that from happening by arriving earlier and circumventing Max's plans, because of his behavior toward Alex on seeing her with Christian. Alex was alone when I brought her a meal, and if she didn't recognize me then, I knew I wouldn't be discovered by anyone. However, when I was instructed to place clothing in her room dropped off from a store in the nearby port, I'd recognized the leather attire a dominatrix would wear. Racks containing several leather bodice in different colors, high heels, and black knee-high boots. Studded chokers and wrist and ankle cuffs. There was no guessing what Christian had wanted from her. When I left, I hung around long enough to hear an argument between Christian and Alex. "What are you doing?" one of the crew members asked when he caught me in front of Alex's door, leaning in to hear the conversation. I looked around and up at the guy. He was 6 feet with blue eyes, and if I hadn't shaved and cut my hair, he could pass for one of my family members. Sadly enough, there were none, except maybe Alex and Max's children. Although most of my family had died in a plane crash while on vacation. It was said that somewhere in this world we had a look-alike, or doppelgangers. At first I didn't believe it, but with him standing in front of me with his brow furrowed looking like my twin Max, I'm suddenly a believer. I'm sure I don't have to explain myself to you, aren't you in maintenance? Maybe I should ask you, what are your duties, and why are you questioning me? He froze, and I knew he'd back down because of his age. He had to be maybe 19. I piled it on when I saw his expression, and the tendency to stammer from being nervous. He murmured. Yes, I doubled down to hide my intentions. Don't you have a job to do in the galley? I think the dishwasher needs repairing, or should I find you a job washing pots? If you're looking for extra work, then there are toilets that need cleaning. We were eye to eye, his bluish green meeting my greens. I'm sorry, sir, but I was just being conscientious. Well, Mr. Conscientious, how about getting to the galley and fix that dishwasher, and I'll see you in there after I speak to Christian. He stared at me. The owner? You won't tell him I was here, will you? The young guy mumbled, his hands in his pockets and his head lowered. That will be our secret. Now go. And the guy with the blue uniform headed in the direction of the galley. At least he knows where the galley is, I thought. Took me forever to find it. Before he left, he'd said, Yes, sir, I apologize. You won't get me fired, will you? The young man, tall and good-looking with a short beard, turned in a circle, clearly nervous about his job status, which had proven to be a good thing for me. Just get to the galley, will you, and see that all the appliances are in working order. I don't want to have the chief cook on my ass because you haven't done your job. Then I'll have to fire you. Yes, sir. There will be no need for that. And he took off, scurrying down the hallway, and made a right turn for the elevator. The guy saluted, which was the wrong thing to do. I wasn't the ship's captain or the mate. I was answerable to the captain, and the captain would be answerable to the owner, who happened to be Christian. When I strolled back to the galley, the young man stopped me and said, I want to apologize again for taking liberties with you, Chief Steward. Please don't report me because I just got this job. I checked everything in the galley, and the appliances seemed to be working fine and up to standards. I glanced at him with a tight mouth and a bored expression. There's no way I'd report him, because I didn't want to call any attention to myself. However, I didn't need a nosy crew member hanging around and snooping on me. I wanted to tell you, Chief, that I'd heard Mrs. Christian crying one day, and I didn't know what it was about. I thought someone was hurting her. I just passed around to make sure she was all right when I spotted you, the young man confessed, tinkering with the blender by turning it on and off, making me nervous. I never could stand loud noises since I'd come home from the war. She should be okay for the moment. I heard she had been on the yacht too long and she wanted to get off but wasn't allowed, I'd said to him to discover what else he'd known. I heard the same thing. You know how close quarters can make you gossip, and since it had been weeks since we'd docked at a port, I just thought what the crew was saying was true. I took the blender from the guy's hand and said, Gossiping about Christian's wife is a sure way to lose your job. Do we understand each other? Yes, sir. I liked that young man because he had manners, and he'd been concerned about Alex. Perhaps Max would have a position for him in one of his hotels, I thought when I'd been given instructions on food and drinks for Christian's party this evening. The one Max will be attending. Chapter 6. Alex. The day had passed quickly, considering all the other days had lingered on where I didn't know the time, date, or the month. I wasn't allowed to have a clock, I supposed, and a few other things I'd managed to sneak in, an extra phone, but what good did that do when the reception had been faulty? Did Christian think I would jump ship, jump overboard and swim to the shore because this situation with him was impossible? I wasn't used to being controlled. I'd considered myself a free spirit even being married to the most controlling man alive, but it was different with Max. Here I go lamenting about Max. I have to get it through my head that Max isn't an option any longer. Now I felt as if I was in a prison, and perhaps I was. Max gave me freedom, but Christian gave me the notion of freedom. He'd convince me to marry him, get on this vessel which I couldn't stand being near water because I'd stay sick, and I did until recently. Maybe it was the fear of water that would make me queasy, or the fear of not having any resources which kept me aboard this vessel and with Christian. He never suggested we have sex, and it could be that I milked the sick part for as long as I could, because I couldn't get used to anyone lying with me except Max. You could say I'd become a prisoner, and I had been responsible for locking myself away, but I didn't hold the key. The key wasn't in my hands, and as smart as I thought I'd been, this was turning out to be the worst mistake of my life. Not even the stupid shit I'd done in the past could rival marrying someone, because I needed money. I'd never cared about the money before, but I needed money now to deal with Maximillian Blackstone. Jonas did warn me that Max may not give me my children if I was stupid enough to marry Christian, but I thought I knew Max better than I did. However, no one knew Max better than his twin Jonas Blackstone. "Oh Jonas, where the fuck are you now that I need you?" I murmured into the silence of the room, and the background of the loud roar of the ocean waves when I headed for the shower. I laughed to myself at the thought of telling Jonas, "I got this. I know how to handle a man like Christian," I remembered saying, because after all I'd been handling Max. Or so I thought. I knew how to control my billionaire husband by catering to his needs, by being a dominatrix controlling him physically and mentally. But Christian, I shook my head knowing deep down I couldn't handle a man I never even slept with. All Max required from me was my body, and to be available whenever he needed me to whip him on his hard muscular ass, using my spike heels whenever I'd flog him if he couldn't get a hard or when he needed it. If that didn't work, I'd tie him to the bed, and I happily offer my body to him along with few lashes on his beautiful hard ass before and after I'd sucked him off, or let him fuck me where he stood behind me and I'd bent over ready to scream the safe word. We had our rituals where we both took turns servicing the other. I laughed at the word servicing. I would command Max to eat me out, and he'd start in the morning and it would continue throughout the day, only stopping if his mouth was tired. A man such as Maximillian should never have to ask to be bound and beaten, but that was his kink, and I felt empowered when he'd plead with me to give him what he'd desire. He never wanted that from everyone, only me, because I knew all the points that would bring him to orgasm, and he'd have pre-cum leaking from his cock slit when I brought out my whip. Afterwards, I'd gladly lick it during the grueling punishment. No. He hadn't craved those things from anyone else, at least that's what I thought, and when it was time and he found that missing in his life, he'd come back begging. Maybe I'd gambled and lost, I thought when I turned off the shower. Reaching for the towel and drying off, I realized it was me who had been the creative partner in our playroom. He never had to, because I was the one who had the imaginative mind, and I would devise all kinds of deviant behavior Max couldn't resist. I offered Max everything he could have desired from a woman. Through Max, I discovered I enjoyed the world of BDSM for my sexual life as well, but only with him because I found myself deep into that life, and now I can't imagine it with anyone but Max. I knew exactly what I was getting into when I married Max, but now I know nothing of what's in store for me since I'd married Christian. The day had passed fast because I was looking forward to seeing Max. Saying his name created that yearning inside me. I imagined him placing his lips over my clit and sucking it, and he never complained because he wanted it as much as I needed it then and now. I longed to tie him to my bed, have him lie on his back while I dressed in front of him in only my thigh-high boots, naked from the thighs up. When he'd see me, he'd salivate. I'd walk in front of him and tease him with my shaven mound. I'd climb on his chest with my whip in my hand, squat over him and let him lick me all over, and sometimes he'd suck the inside of my thighs, rub his nose over my mound, and he'd say, "Sweet, you're so delicious with your smell of vanilla and strawberries. This is where I want to die, in between your legs, sucking your pussy." And then I'd punish him for being a bad boy, and getting me excited, and then I'd climb over his mouth. Now I know if we would ever get back together, he'd punish me for being bad, and I would deserve every spanking he'd give me. There would be no safe words because he'd want my ass raw, and not able to sit for weeks. He'd accuse me and imagine I allowed Christian to have what was his. Max was like that. He was possessive and jealous, but he didn't want anyone to know. Not even me. I'd have to allow him to punish me, and I'd deserve it if he whipped me until my ass was red, so he could take care of my tender ass, because only he would be allowed to see it. I craved that too, and then we would forget all the madness and move on. Max was good for moving on, but I wasn't. He didn't want me remembering anything that had to do with another man, or how I'd reacted to anyone beside him, yet he'd keep that inside him, and it would show on his handsome face, but he'd never let it fall from his gorgeous lips. I never knew before until recently if he was jealous or not until that time in Florida. He had been a master at hiding things. However, my passion for him was so strong that nothing could sour me on him until now. I'd forgiven him more times than I'd like to remember, but not this time when he accused me of wanting and sleeping with Jonas. That was a bridge too far, and that's when I swore revenge on him, because he should have known better, and he should have known there was no one but him. Only him. Staring in the mirror, I placed another layer of red lipstick over a now bright red one. My aim was to get Max so furious with jealousy that he'd kidnap me from Christian and take me off this boat kicking and screaming. Only he could do that, and I was betting on Max doing just that. I wished we could forget the last year and find our way back to each other, but how is that possible now? I thought, as I surveyed the clothing Christian put out for me to wear. I'd married this scoundrel, and now he's planning on displaying me in front of my husband. How can there be anyone but Max? He is my husband, and not that pervert Christian. If I don't dress in these obscene outfits, I knew I'd live to regret every decision I'd made when I said, "I do," when the captain married us. As I tried to select garments that weren't risque, I came to the conclusion that anything that I chose would be obscene. Therefore, I chose a black see-through gown with a panel in front, and I'd wear black thigh-high boots to mitigate the amount of skin being shown. Whom am I kidding, I thought, passing my hand through the gown to see what others would see while they gawk and salivate. I had been instructed by Christian to wear it with a black leather choker and matching wrist cuffs. Maybe I could sneak in something that wouldn't reveal much skin. Maybe. But I doubt it would make a difference. I had been made up to look like a slut for Max. Max didn't object to me looking like a slut, as long as it was in his bed for his eyes only. However, I knew all eyes would be on me. Max will either choke me or kill Christian, I believed, as I dressed in this costume. I hadn't heard from Christian, and perhaps he was busy greeting his guest. What kind of madness is this? I mumbled as I pulled the gown over my head and sat on the bed to try on the boots. Pulling up one boot, I thought about my life. The sickness I had inside me for Max was like a fever that wouldn't break. I loved him more when he walked away from me and filed for a divorce. I didn't see that coming, and did he do this on purpose to calm me down so he could control me? I couldn't answer that question now because things had gone too far. All I knew was we are both alike, because I'd never loved him more than when he whipped my ass and submitted to me, where I'd dominated this strong, handsome, beautiful, sexy man with the green eyes. I'd never loved another man with passion, desire, and longing as I'd done with Max. He had been the first and the only man to claim me in ways that had been both erotic, abusive, and satisfying. We had a special bond sexually, and more than that, I was the mother of his children. He was the one who taught me how to love him, and in turn I taught him how to love me. My love for him started out as a sort of revenge, and morphed into something that only he and I could understand. The door opened after a short knock, and interrupted my thoughts of Max. I knew who it was before I turned to look.